This is a racing game called Forza Motorsport.
To rewind. No, we can't. It's too late now.
Aside from the sound effects from the driving, you might also notice those beeps.
Welcome back to Forza. I'm Brandon Cole. Basically, this is for the blind community, just so you're aware. And I'm going to share with you some of the driving tips that I've picked up over the time that I've been working on the game.
Brandon Cole is completely blind, and this is how he plays the game. The side that the beeps are on, and also the pitch and the intensity, gives him information on everything from where he is on the track, whether or not he's too close to the wall, to how sharp the next turn is.
We didn't go off track that time.
Brandon Cole passed away last year, but he wasn't just a gamer. He was also a consultant on this game. If we're talking about racing games, there is a before Forza and an after Forza. Before this game came out, it wasn't possible really for a blind person to play racing games, but now they can.
Hey, other blind person, I offer you control. I offer you the opportunity to get into a vehicle of your choice, pick the track of your choice, and once you're on that track, the ability to drive it yourself, to take those turns at high speeds yourself, is bringing the AAA racing genre to the blind community to the fullest.
Forza the game was put out by Microsoft, but the technology that made those blind accessibility features possible actually came from a small research lab in New York, led by a professor named Brian Smith. When we first spoke, it was early mid-2020, I think, and you were telling me about this experimental thing that your lab had come up with where blind people could play a racing game.
In this work, we introduced the Racing Auditory Display, the RAD for short, which is an audio system that players can hear through a standard pair of headphones. The RAD makes it possible for people who are blind to play the same types of racing games that sighted players can play.
And you were very confident you were going to get into the game. I don't know if I was as confident. Because it sounded great, but I maybe I was just pessimistic about
I put up a good front, but yeah.
But I think it was more that like, okay, this sounds amazing, but the step is for a game company needs to adopt this thing. Mm-hmm. But it happened. Brian is an assistant professor of computer science at Columbia University, and he's the head of a lab called CEAL that helped make the first blind accessible AAA racing game.
So CEAL stands for Computer Enabled Abilities Laboratory. What we're most known for is our work in assistive technology, in particular technology for people who are blind or low vision. And, the premise is that computers actually can give people a whole bunch of abilities that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Their work goes beyond Forza, and it goes beyond video games.
Video games are but one example of a visual experience. By figuring out how we can enable that fundamental ability to, by oneself, perceive an image or a screen, we can actually unlock not only access to video games, but all sorts of visual experiences in daily life.
This is Kill Switch. I'm Dexter Thomas. How did you become interested in how blind people play video games?
It all started with a YouTube video that I actually encountered while I was a PhD student. It was a video of a blind person by the name of Terry Garrett. He was a teenager at the time, and he was playing a game called The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which is a classic Zelda adventure game that I remember playing as a kid as well.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Terry Garrett was that he wasn't blind his entire life. He actually grew up as a little kid playing that game and then later lost his vision. And as soon as he lost his vision, he almost got shut out of video games completely. For years, the only things he could play was some games that he could find online, which were called audio games, which were games specifically designed for people who are blind, that are audio only. And, in a lot of ways, they're very distilled experiences compared to what sighted players would be able to play. Mm-hmm. So one day, Terry actually decided to pick up Zelda again and say, no, I want to play this game and I'm going to do it no matter what. And it took a whole bunch of trial and error. He'd do a whole bunch of like hacks that he figured out. So for example, you could hear with the stereo audio what side of him enemies were on. He would walk around a room and whack the walls with his sword again and again and again until he heard a different kind of clinking noise.
Okay, that's down the tunnel.
Which told him like, oh, that's the door instead of the rest of the wall. And so that's how I might get into this room. He'd memorize a whole bunch of details and just through trial and error, eventually work his way through. And that really landed for me because like it showed me here's something that I take for granted, these video game experiences, right? And there are a lot of people who go through so much effort just to have some semblance of that experience. Like I was floored, I was amazed, but at the same time, I felt pain. I felt like, wow, like this is not a good state of affairs right now. We've got to do better than this. This isn't right. And that motivated me as like, okay, here's a place where just rethinking how we're designing these games, these computer systems really, can really enable people to have new types of meaningful experiences.
Yeah. You know, we've gotten to the point where, you know, we've legitimately got cars that drive themselves. And when there's a kid who wants to play a video game, or an adult for that matter, who wants to play a video game, who can't see the screen, we sort of shrug our shoulders, I think, collectively and say, you're asking a little bit too much, buddy.
Yeah,
and you
that's
said
right.
no. You said, no,
That's
I don't think
right.
you are.
That's right.
There are more games out now that have accessibility features for blind and low vision players. Like, for example, there's Forza, and there's also The Last of Us 2, which we mentioned in the last episode. But that's a handful of games out of, well, a lot of video games. And it's probably not fair to compare the big blockbuster games to the smaller independent games, but they do have something in common. Most games, especially the blockbuster ones, the AAA games, what we call them, are a lot further behind than they could be in terms of blind accessibility and accessibility in general.
Most mainstream games, the kinds of games you'd buy on Steam or Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, are barely accessible to people with disabilities. That includes people who are blind or low vision, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people with motor impairments, people who have a hard time like mashing buttons or pressing too many buttons too quickly in sequence. That's the current state of things.
Game companies are starting to take accessibility more seriously. Some of this stuff seems kind of obvious, like the ability to make text larger, or the ability to switch to a colorblind mode, or an option to read out the text on the screen. But in order for a blind or a low vision player to be able to truly experience a video game in anything close to the way that, say, I experience it, that game needs to be built with that player's experience in mind from the start. But unfortunately, the industry standard right now is to essentially dumb down the game for that player.
Oftentimes, the basic approach to accessibility is just to make the game a little bit easier, that actually take away agency and choice from the player. So for example, there are video games that have accessibility features that allow players to skip different sections or find items faster, but they do so in a way that almost plays the game for the player. Like, oh, you can't really see the path ahead, you can't really see the image well, press this button and I'll just warp you there. And that form of accessibility does not offer players the same type of experience. And that's the more challenging type of accessibility problem to solve. How can we still meaningfully provide access to that game instead of just like driving the car for the player?
This type of accessibility, of making the game easier to play and taking away some of the agency of the player, you can even see that in The Last of Us, and this is the game that's arguably gotten the most positive attention for their accessibility features.
What The Last of Us does is you can hold a button to automatically move your character to the next waypoint, to the next object of interest.
Vishnu Nair is a research engineer, and he was a PhD student in Brian's lab, which started as just the two of them working on video game accessibility technology.
A lot of the players that we talked to called it the golden path. That's all it does. We refer to it as guidance. These are guidance-based systems, and that's all they do. It's like you're taking their hand and dragging them wherever. And that's not great for independence, and it's that independence and autonomy, that ability to make decisions on what I want to do. Do I want to turn that corner and maybe find a treasure chest? Or if I turn that corner, maybe I'll encounter a very powerful enemy and die. You know, making those decisions and facing those consequences is like the most important part of having fun. And being guided doesn't allow you to have those experiences.
This golden path will basically walk you from point to point in the game, basically just getting you to the next spot to keep the story moving. It is well intentioned, but it doesn't give blind players the same experience as a sighted player. This is going to sound weird, but it turns out that letting a blind player drive a race car is relatively pretty easy. What's hard is letting that blind player get out the race car and just walk around. But Brian and Vishnu think they got it figured out.
You can imagine a game like Zelda, right, where you have the main character Link, and around Link might be, a ladder to a second floor, and then a door into another room, and then a treasure chest or some bushes that you can cut for rupees, the game's currency, etc. There are objects around Link at any given time. And as a sighted person, we can just move the camera around, look around, see what those things are, figure out which way we want to go, what we want to do next. But as a blind person, that experience is very different. Even with some of the cutting edge accessibility features that are out there in games right now, the way that experience would play out is the blind player might press a button to just open a menu that reads out the objects around them. So it might say door, ladder, a treasure chest, bush, whatever. That's it. It's just a linear menu.
Right.
And oftentimes that menu actually kind of waters down the experience of looking around and exploring. So for example, if the whole point is to find a small key hidden somewhere in some nook or cranny that might unlock a door on another side of a dungeon, if you pulled up a menu and the menu just said small key, it kind of spoiled the surprise.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're not playing a game. It's like you're on a guided tour.
Exactly. And so that experience of exploration and discovery is missing from those current accessibility tools.
But how do you define that experience? So this is going to sound totally unhinged, but hear me out. There's this YouTuber who has a series where he goes to what he calls unremarkable and odd places in Zelda. Places where you just go and there's a couple rocks near a river or something. It has nothing to do with the progressing of the game. There's no mission critical item there. It's just a river and some rocks. And one of his videos has 300,000 views, and people in the comments are saying, yeah, I remember that spot. I love that spot. I like hanging out at that spot. So how do we give blind people the closest thing to getting a game and exploring? Not accomplishing things, not checking stuff off of a checklist, but playing the game on your own terms. Brian and his lab are taking this question very seriously, and they've published 2 papers on applications that facilitate precisely this ability. One application is called Navstick, and the other is called Surveyor.
So both Navstick and Surveyor are about making 3D adventure games more meaningfully accessible to blind players. So what Vishnu's work was really about was what's important to the experience of exploration and discovery. When sighted people are playing Zelda, what do they do at one moment in time, the next moment of time? How are they having fun? What choices are they making at any moment in time? And what information are they exploring to figure that out? And now how can we make that process of exploration and discovery more meaningfully accessible?
The first step was figuring out how a blind player could explore their immediate surroundings so that they could understand what choices they had without just doing something for them or telling them where the thing that they were looking for was.
We were like, okay, a person kind of rotates their head all around them to look around themselves and get a map of what's immediately around them.
Right.
How do we give that ability to someone with blindness? And so that was where Navstick came along, where it was really simple. We just repurposed the right thumbstick on a standard game controller. And all you have to do is just point the right thumbstick in some direction, and whatever lies in that direction, the game's going to tell you. That was it.
So I tried Navstick, and it's really intuitive. Basically, you move your right thumbstick around, and whatever you point it at, a voice plays and tells you what it is.
Roaming chopper. Roaming chopper. Roaming chopper 2. Roaming chopper. Roaming chopper 2. Roaming chopper.
We actually created an entire video game to test this, and everyone loved it. What was amazing was that, you know, we put in all these levels. All these levels had like different trees and enemies that they had to shoot using a laser gun. Every participant completed every level of that game, no matter how complex it got. And what we found was that everyone crafted different strategies to get through those levels. Maybe they went this way to the left and defeated a few enemies to get to the finish line. Or maybe they just barreled straight through. They were able to make those decisions. And everyone said that, oh, this is like just so much more fun than using like a menu, for instance, and just being told where to go. I was able to like actually feel like I was playing the game.
This is a pretty simple application, but it's very powerful. So I've tried doing the thing where you close your eyes and make a mental map of your surroundings. And listen, man, I suck at it. This is something that blind people are usually very good at because they have to be. But it can, even for them, get kind of taxing. Navstick means that you don't have to memorize a brand new area when you first go to it. You can check where you're at right then. But for a full 3D game, especially a big game, Navstick is just one part of that equation.
The question beyond Navstick is, how do we allow a blind user to experience a larger area? You have this entire dungeon that you have to explore. How do you handle that? How do you break away from that guidance paradigm where it's like you're leading a person by the hand and leading them to the treasure chest?
I mean, I hesitate to say this, but it's kind of a dumbed down experience of what somebody like me or you who can see the screen would experience.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It does become a question of why are you even playing this at this point? And even with The Last of Us, we had a few participants during the surveyor studies. They talking about how they basically just stopped playing the game after a little while. And just moved on to a Let's Play, just watching a Let's Play on YouTube.
Really?
Because, yes. Because during a Let's Play, you'll probably hear the person playing the game talk as this happens, right? Even if the Let's Play is not targeted toward someone who's blind, they'll still describe what's going on or describe how they're feeling, you know?
Right. And so you're at least getting some semblance of the feeling that you would get if you had the agency to walk around, look around, make mistakes, change your mind about where you want to go.
Can we provide that sense of autonomy and discovery? In game design theory, discovery is one of the main elements of video games that are important for a good experience. And so how do we facilitate that? And so we created this entire system, Surveyor, where they would use Navstick, but in addition to Navstick, we helped keep a log of where they've been. Basically, if you were to take an overhead view of a dungeon,
right,
and you color in the places where the person has been, the point is you want to bring a user to the edge of the area, those borders between where they have explored and where they haven't explored. That's what we did with Surveyor, where effectively it would say, okay, about 50 feet away, there is an unexplored area. And if you select this, you'll be guided there.
Unexplored patch is an area. Unexplored patch, 17 meters to your 12 o'clock. Placing beacon at waypoint 1 of 2, edge of unexplored patch. Reached waypoint 1. Placing beacon at edge of unexplored patch. Reached edge of unexplored patch at your 1 o'clock. Crate. Key card. Crate.
And once you reach that unknown, the guidance cuts off, and you're left with using Navstick to look around that area.
Oh, so it's kind of like fast travel in a game.
Exactly.
I've already explored this part. Don't make me run across a field for 20 minutes. I've already been here. I've completed this area of the game. Let me get back to the town. Cool. And it takes you to the edge of where you've been, drops you off there, and says, okay, figure it out.
Exactly. And that's what promotes that sense of autonomy. That's what promotes that sense of discovery. What we're trying to do is, okay, we don't need to confine the player anymore, right? If we can just open it up, you just take something like Tears of the Kingdom and put a player with Surveyor in it. Can they just explore that area, these cities, these little dungeons and all that?
Zelda Breath of the Wild and its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, are two of the biggest open world games that are out right now. They're really popular, and it's not just because they're good, but because they're really approachable. I have friends who don't play a whole lot of video games, but they'll turn on the Switch, they'll jump in Zelda, they'll go run around in a forest, not even fighting enemies, just having fun. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, you think you could put this onto a Zelda Breath of the Wild type game and people would be able to play it?
Perhaps. I mean, there are obviously going to be some design decisions that need to be made, but in my defense presentation, I literally used Tears of the Kingdom as an example.
Again, blind people can play some video games now and feel that sense of satisfaction of accomplishing a task, like finally beating that last boss. But that's not all a video game is. I mean, the freedom to just run around, explore, hang out, that isn't there for a blind player. But now, with these tools that Vishnu and Brian have developed, a blind player, say like Ross Minor from last episode, could probably do precisely that. Just go wander around without assistance or special modifications. Because that potentially opens things up a lot.
Yeah, that opens a lot of social opportunities as well. It allows a person to relate better. There's this theory in the HCI field in psychology called self-determination theory, which kind of looks at, how are people, what intrinsically motivates people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can open up the same experiences to blind players as sighted players have, then we can foster better connections at the end of the day.
I mean, that totally makes sense. I mean, if I found out somebody played Earthbound, we're immediately friends. Immediately. You know what I mean? We're same thing with really anything. Music, movies, books, whatever. You've experienced the same thing. You read the same stuff. You listen to the same music. Obviously, video games figure into that pretty heavily too.
Right.
The tools that Brian and Vishnu were talking about are pretty incredible, but they're also really intuitive and simple. It kind of makes you wonder why stuff like this is so rare. Well, a big part of the problem is that game companies are really siloed. They don't talk to each other, and they definitely aren't willing to share their secrets with each other. I've had numerous people tell me who develop games either at a big company or even especially if they're independent developer, they'll say, look, I would love to make my game accessible. It would take me 6 months. I'd have to stop everything I'm doing and I'd have to figure it out somehow. And realistically speaking, that's 6 months, and I actually can't afford to do that.
Yeah. And I think that the reason behind that is like every studio has to build these things from scratch. There aren't enough of these like accessibility widgets that are available, like just kind of as a package ready to go that you can plug in.
So that's exactly what Brian and Vishnu had been working on.
Within the lab, we're actually creating a plugin for Unreal Engine to make it easier for any game built on Unreal Engine to adopt Navstick. And then we'll later add surveyor functionality to that.
Unreal is a game engine that a lot of AAA games, that's those big blockbuster games, are built on. So an engine is kind of like the base program that a lot of game developers build their game on top of. So for example, if you're making an adventure game where you walk around, if you had to program in the concept of gravity or the concept of a ground that you walk on, you'd never get anything done. So you get an engine like Unreal that has a lot of the basic stuff built in. And if you need additional features, you get a plugin. So there are plugins that'll help you make realistic trees or animate an ocean or a river or make realistic sound effects. And what Brian is hoping to do is to make a plugin that any game developer who's using Unreal could just bring into their engine and add the Navstick or the Surveyor features.
So we are going to, as a lab, we're going to publish it on Unreal Engine Marketplace so that developers can see the possibilities and see exactly like how to implement and incorporate these things into the game.
How much would this cost for a developer?
It would be minimal. I don't expect it to cost more than, say, like $100 or something like that.
Okay, yeah, and the ability to throw that in and potentially have some more people buy your game who would never have picked it up.
Absolutely.
Is kind of cool.
Yeah, and I would love to, for like especially like independent developers and things like that. I'd love to have a program where they could incorporate into their game without having to pay. This is something I'm still working with the university on.
The hope is that these plugins make it so obviously easy to add in accessibility features that developers see it and they say, you know what, let me just download this plugin and just do it. And they'll be able to get started pretty soon.
So we're actually hoping to launch that by the end of this calendar year, 2025.
I really do hope that game developers check this out because I'd love to see what kind of games come out in the next few years that use this technology. Because this isn't just a niche feature. It really can open up games for an entire community of people who've been shut out of video games. And that can open up new ways for everyone to connect. I remember early quarantine, my niece was in a different state. And when we wanted to communicate, she didn't call me. She said, yo, let's get on Fortnite. And that's how we talked. We got in Fortnite and we ran around and build stuff. And, you know, she showed me some weird little structure that she'd built and her friends are running around in there. And like, that's how we talked. And so video games now are, for better or worse, where people spend time with each other.
Yeah, they're immersive, right? It's a form of immersion. And so I think that, like, you know, any tool that can enable access to video games could also enable access to a whole host of immersive experiences as well. Like being able to like tour apartments, for example, without having to visit that apartment or tour a different city.
There's potential to bring Navstick, something like Navstick, into the real world as well.
Really?
Yeah, navigation through the real world using, you know, you have a blind person outside or in a building, you know, pointing in some direction, maybe with your camera or something else, and having it say what's around you.
Croissants. Coffee grounds. Dark chocolate.
This is a pretty interesting idea because it could be an augmented version of what blind and low vision users have found in the Meta smart glasses. If you haven't seen our episode on that, you can check that out. But instead of AI as most people think of it, this would be layering a video game kind of on top of reality.
Example that I like to give is New York's Penn Station. It's the busiest train station in the world, and it's massively complex to someone who's never been there before, with multiple railroads and subway lines and, you know, et cetera. It's huge. And imagine being able to like swipe by like tapping the side of an earbud and exploring, you know, kind of circularly, and being able to hear spatial audio of like what's around you in Penn Station. Oh, the ticket office is here. That's track 12. That's track 13. Here's the McDonald's, or here's the Shake Shack, right? To really get your bearings of this physical environment. We have this physical world. We just have to create a virtual representation of it first. Let's say like a video game version, a digital version. So that like now when we are in the physical world, if the system knows where you are, it's the same as Navstick. You're exploring that environment, but you just happen to be physically inside the place as well.
The video game stuff that I'm messing with and that in the future gamers will be able to use ends up kind of being like a trial run for using this in real life at a train station or a grocery store or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, oftentimes we think of the games that we prototype as being almost like testing grounds, right? That's our little our petri dish, really, to test our systems. But it's just a fake version of what might be a real world environment as well. And that's the amazing thing, I think, about just like innovation in general. Like we often think that it requires like so many resources and so much effort in order to, you know, to change the world in a meaningful way. But really it requires an idea. And so small teams of people can do something to test out an idea and say, hey, there's something here, and show that and demonstrate that to the world to inspire other people. More so than the software, the code, or the product itself, it's the inspiration that is what catches on and like really like makes change. We could have spent another like multiple years trying to like polish the racing game stuff ourselves more and more and more, but it wouldn't have had the same effect as us actually doing a better job of explaining like why this is important, how this works, how other people can, sort of like take all of this and take the next step. And, circling back to Terry Garrett, the story, the Ocarina of Time player that I mentioned before, he posted YouTube videos of him playing Forza, and really getting that experience of racing.
Segment score 7.1.
7.1? Come on.
Which is just a full circle moment for me.
Oh, that must have been pretty cool. The guy who kind of got you into this playing some of your work.
Exactly. Yeah, it was amazing to see, and just him having fun and like, wow, like now I know why racing games are a thing. That kind of impression. Really, really awesome to see.
If you told someone in 2015 that they wouldn't be able to walk to their mailbox without being recorded, they would think that you were describing a science fiction dystopia. But if you say that now in 2025, they'd say, well, yeah, you're just describing the basic function of my neighbor's Ring camera. We now expect technology to keep expanding. So what if we started expecting accessibility to advance also? I mean, 5 years ago, I thought Brian was nuts for thinking that Ross Minor would be able to play a racing game. And then this year I walk into Ross's apartment and he's got a driving wheel on his desk to play Forza. But this stuff doesn't just happen. It's the industry, it's the universities, and it's the gamers. I'm not saying you need to write a strongly worded email to Nintendo, but you do have influence over things, and they do affect everyone. I mean, look, I personally do not need Navstick, and I don't need Surveyor, but I am more likely to buy a game if I know that it means that I might get to play co-op with Ross. The stuff that people like Brian and Vishnu and Ross build is gonna make games more interesting for everyone. I mean, who knows? Maybe someone listening to this right now, maybe you, could end up contributing something to that process. Oh, one more thing. This is for all my game developers out there who are listening to this. You might have been a little disappointed to hear that they're making these plugins for Unreal Engine. Because look, Unreal is great. A lot of blockbuster games are built on it. But it's just that. It's kind of for the big time games. Why would you leave the independent game developers out? The ones who, use different software, cheaper development software, like say Unity. Well, I asked Brian about that.
I wanted to follow the model that happened with Forza, where like a major developer had this feature incorporated into their game that got noticed by the whole industry. But that's an important first domino to fall. And so we do want to make a Unity equivalent of the plugin as well. But we chose Unreal first for that reason, so that we could work more closely with some of the bigger developers to have it like in a game that millions of people play, like in at least one or two signature games that millions of people play, so that we can work through all the kinks with their larger teams. They would have more resources, and then figure out how to tailor both that Unreal Engine plugin and how to do things right on Unity for the smaller indie developers the first time.
So there's your answer. And I get the approach. Anyway, catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the video version of Kill Switch. This is our first 2-part episode, and it's something I've been really excited to do. And if you made it this far, it probably means that you'd probably like also the podcast version of the show. So if you want to check out the audio version with a whole different sound mix by Kyle Murdoch, you can get that wherever you get your podcasts. And, the link is down there in the description. And as a bonus, the audio versions come out first, so you can hear the next one before everybody else over here.